message to the billionaire class: you can't have it all.
Welcome, everybody, to the Evolution of Now. This week it's a little bit of a special episode. With me, I have two esteemed colleagues, and Jordan and Michael. They're also here. I have Aubrey with us. How are you doing this week, Aubrey?
I'm doing all right.
Excellent. And we also have Kate. How are you doing, Kate?
Hi.
Hello.
I'm doing well.
How has the world been going for you two these days with Trump America in full force? How have things been?
It's scary and entertaining, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. There is a little bit of like terror on all of our minds, I think, with regards to maybe the potential ending of the world.
It's amusing. Yeah. It makes me forget about my own fucked up politics.
Yeah, it's a little
Brexit.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating and aggravating, and just like, what the hell are the Democrats doing? As most like, I expect like nonsense from Trump. That doesn't surprise me. I'll roll my eyes at it. I'll get like kind of pissed off at, like the horrible policies, but I expect it out of him.
Yeah.
And then the Democrats just give in. And that just pisses me off.
Yeah, it's very understandable. I think this is sort of like a Democrat 101 for a very long time at this point. They have always just been extremely weak when it comes to anything. And it's coming home to roost at this point. The chickens are coming home to roost in some ways.
Yep.
But, yeah, I mean, I know, Michael, you had a story you wanted to bring to us this week before we got into the main topic. What was that about?
So, I can't remember when. There it is, on the story. I should have really had this open before we started.
Not winning, Michael. Not winning.
So a Cornell student is facing deportation. He's a Canadian kid. After beating up a black kid and shouting, "Come fight us, N-word."
That's always nice and colorful language.
Now you might think that's fairly standard for America. The reason why I want to bring it up is
says
that
the British guy here.
he's not been suspended. He's been put on hold, and his lawyer wants to get the charges thrown out because it'd be damaging to his career.
Poor kid.
Wow. Someone was
shame.
really grasping for a defense there, wasn't he?
Yeah. It'd be damaging to his promising career. I don't give a fuck, okay? He fucked his own career up when he started attacking people.
Yeah, if you go around assaulting people and yelling racial slurs...
Yeah.
But
you don't deserve to have a career.
Like white privilege in a nutshell. He assaults some guy, beats him up, and now he just expects to just carry on and get back to normal because it hurts his future.
Well, because he's been able to.
Yeah,
in the past. So why not now?
Exactly. And why are these people so stupid?
Yeah, well,
I don't know how he thought that he could just assault someone else and
the attorney went on to lament. A 4-year degree from Cornell was a lifelong dream for Mr. Greenwood. A conviction here would erase that opportunity. That's not our problem.
No.
That's your fault. You did this.
Were you trying to say something there, Tensai, before Michael completely rudely, interrupted you?
Well, I was just like, I don't understand how, you can go around and like think that you can assault someone and not have to face legal consequences.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of obvious.
I mean, if you're white and in America, that might be what it is. I don't know.
No, not even then.
No, like, I get it.
You can't just do that and expect to get away with it.
Yeah.
And it's no different in Canada.
Yeah, here we go. You might be sand N-word black, but you're not black, one man says in a video that went viral before adding, come fight us, N-word.
Sad state of affairs in this world.
He thinks he can just go back to university and oh, well, sorry, that was bad. Anyway, let's go back to normal now.
I mean, he's still young. Maybe he'll learn the repercussions of his actions at some point.
Assuming he gets any repercussions of his actions.
Well, I mean, if they deport him and they don't allow him to go back to school, that might be something. I mean, obviously, it might not be enough, but who knows? But,
I think one of the greatest things about, like, the modern day is that, I mean, we have access to just telling employers, like, look at this fucked up person that you're trying to hire. Like, this is their history. We have access to all that information. There's no secret. So even if he doesn't have any direct repercussions, like legally, you know, he could have other things in his future, which might be punishment.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, there is the hope that they eventually change their actions and become a better person. And hopefully the repercussions of their actions are that. And we'll see. We will definitely see what happens in the future with that. It doesn't seem to be working with a lot of people out there right now. But in other news, MIT scientists say that we may be on the brink of having nuclear fusion be a reality. And they're estimating within the next 15 years they can bring it onto the power grid. That seems a little bit, optimistic in some ways. I know you've had a little bit of a criticism earlier today with this, Mike.
Yeah, it's been 15 to 25 years away for the last 40 years now, so I wouldn't put too much stock in that time.
Yeah.
For anyone who knows anything about fusion, it's the torus type reactor they're talking about. Won't get into too much of what that is. It's just it's a donut with magnets where they use the magnets to fuse hydrogen.
Yeah.
And it's one of the, I think, two main designs. Both show promise. I believe they've broke even in power, so they've gotten more power out of it than put in. The problem is now sustaining it for long enough for it to be commercial to actually make it work commercially.
Yeah. Now, I know we had an episode on nuclear power, and I think we did mention in there what fusion is, but just a layman's term with fusion is there's two different kinds of nuclear power. The one that we use today is nuclear fission, and it's much different from fusion. Fission creates a chain reaction that is hard to control, and it sort of goes on its own once you start the reaction, and that's how you gain power. Is it's doing itself, it's creating the power itself by the chain reaction, whereas fusion is you're putting power into the system, and from that energy it's hopefully leading to more energy coming out. And fusion is completely safe comparative to fission, because once you stop putting power into the equation, it stops completely. The entire chain or the chemical reaction or whatever it is stops immediately, and there's no chance of nuclear meltdown or anything like that.
Yeah, and there's no hazardous materials or anything that can leak. It's all
except for coolant, from what I saw.
Hydrogen goes in, and helium comes out. Yeah, there's some chemicals used in the reactor itself, like coolants and things, but nothing like plutonium.
Yeah,
extremely deadly stuff.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that as well in the future and see where that's going to go. There was also a high school club in upstate New York. Says that guns are, their shooting club is safer than playing chess. Yes.
All right.
Just think about that, guys.
Yeah, but it isn't though, is it?
I don't know.
Like, what's happening in chess club?
Seriously, I don't know. It's some crazy stuff over there. I don't know. Maybe like you try and go like king's pawn to queen's. I don't know, and then you break a nail. Oh my god!
Chess.
That was.
It's
What
chess,
if you get
but all the
they
pieces
get
are
really
wrong.
angry
and you just slam that
toss
piece
the
down really
board.
hard.
hit somebody in the eye?
That's actually a good point. That is a
What
very
about,
good point.
Like, you know, like Harry Potter with a massive chest.
Oh, you
maybe
get like
that.
sharks flying everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's that.
Maybe.
That must be what they're thinking about.
But yeah, so that happened this week.
Wait, did they not so fast. Did they provide any any more like I don't know, an explanation
Like
to
statistics?
why that's true or why they're saying that?
It seems like it's sort of like an easy anecdote thing. It's sort of like whenever the right wing says anything, they're like, "Oh yeah," and I don't know, the liberals are all this way, and we all know this. And then it's like, what? Where's your evidence for this? They don't ever have any, but it seems like that's what's going on here in some ways, where they're just saying, "Oh yeah, guns are so safe that these chess clubs, they're even more dangerous than we are." And I don't know. I don't know. Terrible analogy, maybe, but I'm really good at those. But yeah, we should probably move into our main topic of the week here. You guys at home might be wondering why we have so many people on the show this week, because it's usually just me, Jordan, and Michael, and we are joined by Kate and Aubrey this week. Well, this was a topic that we've wanted to cover for a while now. And we felt that it wasn't really a smart idea for three guys to be talking about women's rights by ourselves.
We are now going to explain women's rights.
Yeah. We're going to mansplain to you guys out there about women's rights. So yeah, we kind of decided, you know what, we probably shouldn't do that, and we should wait to have some actual ladies on the podcast to actually go through these things with us, because that would be the sensible, intelligent thing to do, I think. But I guess as a aside here, I think we should look at the history a little bit of where we came from. Back before the Civil War even was raging in America here, women were fighting for what's called suffrage. And suffrage is another word that they use for basically voting rights. And women have been fighting for suffrage since before the 1820s and 30s, I believe, from what I've read. And it took them many, many years, almost an entire century, if not an entire 100 years, to actually get it. Because they started in the 1820s, I believe, really pushing for suffrage, and they only finally got it all the way in 1919, when it was finally passed by Congress. And it's a really interesting history that we have about women's rights in this country, this being the first real big fight, because before this time, women weren't allowed to have property, they weren't allowed to own property, they weren't allowed to vote, they were not considered citizens in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean, women tried to push to change that. And also, interestingly enough, back then as well, there were a bunch of different movements going on back then, not just for women's rights, but there was also what was termed what did you call it earlier, Aubrey? What was that one movement you were talking about?
Oh, the temperance movement?
The temperance movement. Yeah, that was what it was. Yeah.
The temperance movement was basically a movement that was started and perpetuated by women in about the mid 1800s, basically to try to ban alcohol, because they blamed alcohol for a lot of their social ills, including having husbands that went out, got drunk, and then came home and beat them.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously guys do that without being drunk, but hey, if you can easily blame something rather than your husband, people do it. So yeah, and actually in the 1870s, the Women's Christian Temperance Union actually began advocating specifically for women's suffrage because they viewed it as a way of allowing conservative women to push a conservative agenda.
That's interesting. And not only that, though, but women were at the forefront of abolition of slavery, too, right? That was another big thing, that women were also a big push on as well.
I believe so. I'm not...
Yeah, I know that at the convention at Seneca Falls, which was a huge anti-slavery convention, there was a lot of like women's rights activists involved in that.
Yeah. Where was this? There were two ladies that were actually at that convention that were looks to be two of the biggest names back then in the cause. Was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and they were heads of the women's rights struggle at the time. And they were also abolitionists that wanted to end the practice of slavery. And women were definitely pushing for these changes. And it still took many decades to eventually abolish slavery, but then it also took time for them to even get their own rights for suffrage, which is it's really interesting.
Yeah. Mind you, all these different rules regarding like women's rights varied from state to state. For example, women actually got the right to vote in 1890 in Wyoming. Specifically, that was the only way that Wyoming was able to get enough votes to actually become a state, was through women voting for it and through women's rights.
That's interesting. I guess part of like statehood back then was tied to how many voters you had, I guess, on the roll. Is that what it was? Or
I think so. There was basically you had to hit a certain threshold of population and development.
All right.
So if you had a low population, you're going to need a larger percent of your population to be able to vote in order to actually reach that threshold.
That is interesting to think about then, yeah. And it was. I guess that's in some ways probably due to some of the fight from women's rights movements up until that point, but also it was very self-serving for the state itself to actually become a state, and which is kind of interesting in itself that they that was actually a factor in it, but throughout the Civil War era, after the Civil War, her name was Elizabeth Cady Stanton that I mentioned earlier. Her and Susan B. Anthony and Sojourner Truth also were fighting after the Civil War to be included in the new constitutional amendments that were giving the rights to the former slaves. And they were not, unfortunately. I do know I read Section 2 of Amendment 14 of the Constitution actually states men have the ability to vote, and it says specifically men. I have Section 2 here. It says representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and the judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof, is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. So they made it pretty clear that they were not going to include women into the 14th Amendment. So that is depressing, to say the least. But I guess in a lot of ways unshocking. So they opened up suffrage to the former black men that were slaves, but they were definitely still holding the cards close to their chest when it came to giving women the same rights. And so, like we said, eventually it took decades longer till 1919 when they actually finally got the suffrage amendment. And why did it take that long? I guess you can just look at our history here in the United States, and maybe that's obvious, because this has been somewhat of a racist and misogynist and patriarchal society in a lot of ways for a very long time, even before the founding of this nation. But I digress. After 1919, there was a new push out of the women's rights movement, and to pass another amendment to the Constitution that they were terming the Equal Rights Amendment. And I don't know if you guys have anything to add here. Anyone?
So the Equal Rights Amendment. Sorry. The Equal Rights Amendment was actually originally introduced in 1921, although it didn't actually end up passing until
1972?
I think 1972.
Yeah.
Yeah, passed both houses of Congress in 1972.
Yeah. Just to clarify here, it's the equalrightsamendment.org website is where I'm pulling some information from. They said here that the amendment was introduced in every session of Congress until it was passed in reworded form in 1972. So they were pushing for this thing to be passed for over 75 years. For context.
Yeah. Now there is a provision when it comes to the amendment process where if Congress chooses, they can put a deadline for ratification, which basically says if it is not ratified within this period of time which Congress has the power to specify, then it does not become an amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was one of the few amendments that have passed that was given a deadline, and it was not ratified in time.
Yeah. And if you go onto this website and look at in the history section of the website, if you scroll down, there's actually a map of the United States, and it shows all of the ratified states in like a purplish blue color, and all of the not ratified states are in yellow. Now, I would challenge you guys to actually pull this map up, and then also pull the map up of the 2016 election map, and see where all these states lie. It's kind of interesting how it works out. I guess you could even look at all of the election maps from all of the previous presidential elections, and it still lines up relatively accurately, except for two states, that being Virginia and Illinois, did not ratify, and they did vote blue a few times within the last few cycles. All of the rest, solid red states. So I found that little bit really, really interesting. And I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Does that surprise you at all? Or,
No, of course not.
So I would also point out that a lot of those states are known for being very religious, and more on the extremely conservative side of religious. And generally speaking, in most of those very conservative religious groups, they insist that women are not equal to men. So that's going to have an influence.
Yeah.
Also, Republicans really started pulling in the Christian vote only about 30 to 40 years ago. Obviously, the South has had,
Yeah.
a history of racism and misogyny, but it hasn't been tied to Christianity as far as Republicans go until relatively recently.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as the history of our country goes.
Yeah, I guess the through line here, though, is not necessarily the Republican Party as much as it is conservatism. Is what the main through point here is. Because, at one point, the Democratic Party was definitely the party of the slave owners. And they were definitely a party of Jim Crow. Because back then, when Jim Crow was in full force, the Democrats were in power in the South. And it just so happens, though, in the last few decades, the title shift between the two different parties has taken place, and I guess starting maybe in whole earnest was under Ronald Reagan. I think was when it really got underway. This shift between the two parties, with the more conservative elements in the country moving towards the Republicans, and the more progressive side of things moving slightly towards the Democrats. And just for a little bit of context, so this isn't necessarily I'm just trying to shit on Republicans. It's just conservatism in itself has really been at odds, obviously, with progress. Maybe that's obvious in just parlance of what they stand for. Conservatism being kind of like just not changing and keeping things the way that they always were. And progress being things are changing for the better of society. But I digress. But yeah, the Equal Rights Amendment, like Aubrey said, it passed Congress, and then it failed because what the amendment needed to happen is a number of the states had to ratify it, and unfortunately they needed, I think, 38 states, and I think they got only about 35 altogether. So they were close. They were very, very close.
Correction. They got 31 states and they needed 35.
I see here Indiana became the 35th state to ratify, but that was after the fact, I think.
After the deadline. Yeah, they've since gotten more, but I believe the threshold has also changed. I'm not sure about that.
Hold on. Here, I got it here.
Wait, this one says 38. Yeah. I've got two different websites that are saying different things, so.
Yeah. I'm just going off of the equalrightsamendment.org website. I would hope that they would have the most accurate information, but they do have a sentence here. Like the 19th Amendment before it, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, barreled out of Congress, getting 22 out of the necessary 38 state ratifications in the first year. But the pace slowed as opposition began to organize. Only 8 ratifications in 1973, 3 in 1974, and 1 in 1975, and none in 1976. So, I was right. Thank you very much. I'm the best.
Fine.
I'm winning the best right now. Big league. with my numbers. But yeah, we needed 38, and they only got 35 after the fact, I believe, is the case here, unfortunately, before that deadline came about, unfortunately. And so it's really shocking. The one thing that they actually put a deadline is this one. That's pretty important to a lot of people, I would imagine. And especially a half of the population, you know? And not shocking, but shocking as well. I don't know. It's so demoralizing at times. Just looking at the history of all of this and realizing all these times where we look at our previous heroes and what they were able to accomplish, and then realizing they really didn't accomplish all that much, unfortunately. They accomplished something, but like we kind of wish that more would have been accomplished as well. But 'tis be the lay of the land, I guess. But,
also, I think it's really sad how recent this all was. I mean, we think about, you know, the 1960s when the civil rights movement was going on. That really was not that long ago.
Yeah. That's,
you know, we're talking about 1970. Exactly. I mean, it's so disturbing that this is in such recent history, and we just kind of pretend that it's in the distant past. Oh, we're moving on. We're such a progressive country now. We're so progressive in our thinking, and I just don't think that we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
I sometimes hear about older black people who remember being segregated, like in schools and things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Christ, you actually know that you actually lived through that. That's post-war. I mean, it's very, very recent, 50 years ago. Yeah.
You can also find people in our society that like are only a few short generations, divided from their ancestors being slaves. You know,
right?
So even that history is really not all that far away. If you really like look at the grand scheme of history being thousands and thousands of years here, and in just recorded history, we've only been without slavery for a little bit over 100 years, around like 150 years, I think, around about this time now, right? So I mean, that's really not that long ago, if you really think about it.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
And like I think my grandparents are in their late 80s, so just they're only like a little bit separated from that experience. But
yeah, they would have easily lived through some of the really rough times during the civil rights movement, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. I mean, they're very modest today, so they don't necessarily talk too much about growing up in the South, because my grandfather actually grew up in the South. But yeah, undoubtedly they definitely experienced a lot of that on the way.
Yeah. You know what you should do, Jordan, is talk to him about it if he's willing to talk about it. You know, get his perspective on what happened. That really is important to talk to our grandparents, and I need to do that with my grandparents. Like, what the hell were you guys doing back then? I really hope not some Klan rallies, but I don't know. Yeah. It's just it worries me, you know. Like, but we can definitely learn a lot from the older generations, and yeah, it would be really really fascinating to learn his experience of that time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. But I guess back to the topic, since we're really good at going into tangents. But I guess we fast forward into today with the women's rights movement. This has never stopped throughout this time period, and like we were saying, that was in the 70s when the Equal Rights Amendment was trying to be passed, and now it's 2016, only a few decades later. And what is the current state of events here? Well, I guess you just look at the news these days. You know, I guess we can see an honest change finally, thankfully, happening, where serial sex offenders are actually being called out for once. You know, like Harvey Weinstein, for instance, being the really big one that blew up in today's culture. He is a grotesque human being, and there's a video, or maybe not video, but I know there's audio of him trying to coax at least one woman to come up to his hotel room, and he is like basically begging her to come up there, and it's just as creepy as you can think of it. And but that was the culture for a very long time, and we can see finally now that a lot of women are actually coming out against these types of situations, that things are starting to shift. But what are your perspectives on this specifically? I guess we can start with Aubrey. What do you think of the movements these days?
Well, it's kind of difficult because, like, I hear people talking about it, like, on Twitter and online, but, like, in real life, like, nobody's really mentioning it or even talking about the subjects, you know, that are being brought up about, you know, like, sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual assault, rape, and all that. To me, it seems like a distant conversation that's happening online, just like a lot of other, you know, social justice causes on Twitter, where everybody gets outraged, builds himself up into a moral panic. You know, they target a few people, you know, the news goes along with it, and then after a while, everybody moves on to the new scandal. I'm really hoping that isn't going to be what comes of this, but I'm not hopeful at this point in time.
Yeah, it's hard to be hopeful. I'm sorry, Kate?
It's okay. I agree to a point with you. I think that the good thing that's coming out of this, as far as people talking about all of this, whether it's rape or sexual assault or sexual harassment, is that I find that a lot of people that I know have come forward about their personal experiences. And while it's important that we condemn these men who are using their power in Hollywood or as politicians, that is very important that we discuss that. But I think it's even more important that we discuss, you know, the boyfriend who was using, you know, sex as a punishment for his girlfriend, or, you know, the more personal level things. And I think that a lot of women are coming forward about their personal experiences with rape or sexual assault. And I think that that's really what I've seen has been a really good thing. I mean, I have a lot of friends who have come forward about it, even if it is just on the internet.
Yeah. Now, I have this one little thing that I wanted to read here from NBC 10, which is a local news channel for the Philly area. The piece here is called Half Say #MeToo movement has helped address gender inequality poll. That's the name of the article. It will be in the description of this. It's a really short synopsis of the story here. I think the main part is actually maybe a clip from their news channel. But it says here, about half of U.S. adults think the spotlight that the Me Too movement shined on sexual assault and harassment has helped address gender inequality, according to a News NBC News Survey Monkey poll. 51% of respondents said it was helpful, while 20% said it led to unfair treatment of men, and 26% said it made no difference. 3% gave no answer. And here it breaks down into Republican, Independent, and Democrat. A higher share of Republicans who responded to the poll, 37%, believed the Me Too movement has led men to be treated unfairly. And independents 18% of independents think that men have been led to be treated unfairly, and only 7% of Democrats. So that's a little bit of context, and where the American people, I guess, at least for this NBC 10 poll, is concerned. That sort of shows you a breakdown between the different ideas on this a little bit, which I found a little bit interesting. I don't know about you guys, but
I wonder what ways they think men are being, treated unfairly or treated differently?
Well, this thing
what was the wording?
Here says unfairly.
Okay.
Said that it led to unfair treatment of men. So unfair
in what
treatment.
Way? Like, I wonder what ways they're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
How?
Now, I sort of I think there is an idea that some men are being unfairly accused, and because of that, these men that are maybe innocent, that have never done anything, or maybe, I don't know, are being raked through the coals, and their lives are being ruined because of this unfairly. Maybe that's the avenue that comes from.
Yeah, well, in any movement like this, there's always going to be a small percentage of people who just lie for the attention.
Yeah.
Like I said, small percentage, and especially if they name names in their accusations, yeah, that can ruin a guy's life. Or a woman.
Yeah.
It's not, rapists and sexual abusers and all that are equal opportunity, which is something I think gets forgotten a lot. We see a lot of it with heterosexual interactions because the vast majority of people are heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
Well, and the media wants to cover that because that's the most relatable.
Yes. But I mean, like, it's kind of, I think the metoo movement has shown a spotlight on systemic issues about gender inequality in this country and around the world too. I mean, it's not just, in America either. But as far as actual change, I don't think there's any actual change other than people are, having to face specific ramifications for their specific actions, I
don't know that that's the purpose of the Me Too movement. I think that the purpose of the Me Too movement is more for visibility of people who have experienced these things. I don't think it ever was a platform for, this is what we need. This is the avenues that we need to go down for creating equality, whether it be in the workplace or anything like that. I think it's just, from what I understand, it's visibility of, these are people who who have experienced this. And guess what? Like, if the majority of us women have experienced, and men, like you said, have experienced some form of sexual harassment, rape, sexual assault.
Yeah.
And I think that in that way, the Me Too movement has been extremely successful in showing that everybody has experienced this.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago, when people would talk about rape culture, it would just be dismissed by most people. I think this is really opening people's eyes to the fact that we do have rape culture. But like when I pay attention to the actual stories that are being shared, I see systemic failures, bosses who didn't act. The boss themselves were the abusers or the harassers. Stuff like this. And part of the problem is also that a lot of times women don't have much in the way of recourses. There's, several thousand rape kits that go untested every year. They just sit in a closet somewhere and they never get processed. I forget the actual number. But there's, if you want to file a sexual harassment claim and your boss either doesn't believe you or your boss himself or herself
is the person harassing you, what's your recourse? You quit. Because, especially if the people above him or her doesn't believe you. You just have to quit and move on with your life. Because, unless you actually have enough money to press a sexual harassment lawsuit, you don't really have any actual recourse.
I agree with that. And I think that what you said about rape kits, it's the same for situations of sexual assault outside of the workplace and rape outside of the workplace. Filing a police report and going to a police station and filing a report, it's very intimidating for a person to go through. And they make it intimidating because it's a really hard thing for the police force to pursue. It's not a crime where there is a ton of evidence a lot of times. And even with some evidence, it can be taken as it was consensual. So it's a really hard thing for all parties, whether it's the victim or I'm not saying, oh, poor police force, but it is hard for them to really pursue.
Yeah. And I don't know necessarily what the solution is, although definitely processing rape kits would be a great start.
It might help, but yeah.
Yeah. But I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. We do it all the time.
Rape kits are also really invasive, It's
they are.
Something that is fun for a person to have to go through.
Yeah. And that's traumatizing, especially after you have literally just been raped. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
one thing that I would like to say, though, on the Me Too movement itself, you did at least acknowledge there that the Me Too movement has, in some ways, actually brought more attention to these issues, right?
Yes, that's
Aubrey?
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, one of the most positive things about it.
Yeah.
We weren't really talking about this. What was it? Just a couple years ago, I think it was, we were talking about, basically systemic rape in the military and how it's a major problem. And then we talked about that for a while, and then we just kind of stopped talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's never been addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just simply another part of that. This is the one that affects, the average American as opposed to just the military. But the military is included into this.
Yeah. But with this movement, though, don't you think that this might actually help some women feel more confident about actually coming out when they have something like this happen to them?
Yeah, definitely. Especially because a lot of times women are dissuaded from reporting instances of harassment or assault or rape because it's difficult to prove. It's difficult to really, it's perceived as you causing trouble or whatever. There's all kinds of different excuses people will give you for why you shouldn't report it and why you shouldn't pursue it. And I think the fact that so many people are able to bring out their story and they're not being told that they're just being hysterical or imagining things has been extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Even the ability to just come forward on the internet has been huge for a lot of people who have experienced this. Just knowing that their Facebook friends are not going to judge them for experiencing this because it's not their fault, but they still feel like it is.
Yeah. And that is all too reoccurring when I have read on this thing that a lot of women wonder, was it my fault? Did I do something wrong? And I would have to say, I think you agree with me here. No, it's not your fault. No, this was not your fault. None of what happened to you was your fault in this regard.
It doesn't matter what you were wearing, how short your skirt was, how much you drank, what situation you were in. It's never your fault.
No.
Yeah, and a lot of women have also internalized that too. I remember when I was a kid, there'd be a story about someone got raped on the news, and my mom's first question would be, well, what was she wearing? And I mean, that's coming from my mother. So, I mean...
But that's the mentality of what it was back then. I mean, if you were drunk, like, why was she drunk? Why was she by herself? Why was she wearing that dress?
Yeah. And I mean, that's not even that long ago. That's like literally 20 years ago.
Right.
My mom was saying stuff like that. She still says that occasionally.
It was a great advert about this, actually, where they had... it was a mock thing where someone came and says, my wallet was robbed. And it says, okay, well, what are you wearing? What? Why is that important? And when you put it into that context, it was so insane. Why on earth would you ask any of that?
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, it's for some reason normal with this type of crime that, well, just what you ask, what was she wearing? Was she drunk? I mean, how was she acting? Was she being flirty when it was her fault? No.
Yeah, and it sort of like comes from the narrative of like, well, guys are gonna just be guys; they're gonna do terrible things, and if you let it happen as a woman, it's your fault, and
it's our responsibility.
It's so on the face wrong.
Yeah,
and I mean this is the narrative though, like that your mother probably was brought up under as well. This is why she has internalized that in a lot of ways to think that way. And, this is why even like Weinstein, when all this is coming out, he's like flabbergasted by this. I don't know, this is just how people acted back then. We could just go up to these actresses and say, hey, how's the things going in your underwear? I don't know what he would say. I don't know, but like they could like just go up and start these really creepy and horrible conversations for these women to have to deal with, and it's not fun to have someone like asking you like how have you been doing with like partners or something. I don't know, like it's just something that you don't want to be talking to, like, I guess your boss about,
Yeah, and it's none of their business. It's not professional at all.
Yeah, absolutely. But, like, what it was they were trying to gauge these women to see who was susceptible, I guess, to being, leveraged for sex. And...
Yeah.
And it's awful, but like this was the culture for a very, very long time into your parents and my parents, I'm sure as well, and their grandparents also probably went through similar, if not the same thing, So I mean, this has been happening for probably time immemorial, like this. I don't know when this trend started, but it has definitely been a very long time. Maybe the ascendancy of Christianity, even. I don't know. But
well, you can definitely trace it, at least in American culture, at the very least, back to the Victorian era. Because there was basically, the Victorians saw women as one of two things. The prostitute and the chaste wife.
Mm-hmm.
You were one of the two. And, that's extremely difficult to fulfill either of those roles.
Yeah.
But I think we still feel that way. I mean, like of course, I don't think any of the people on this podcast think that way. But as a culture,
I think Mike might, but
Michael and Jordan have been really quiet, so they might be thinking that way.
Just nicely nonchalantly throw Michael under the bus,
Yay, it's nice under the bus.
Well, Victorian era, Queen Victoria, Michael's British.
Oh, look at that.
Put the lines together. I don't know.
Shush, I'll be off with your head.
Don't you have some Scots to crush, Mike? Isn't that a thing that you guys do over there?
Yeah, there are some rebellious Scots knocking about. I need to get my crossbow.
I don't think crush is the right term for that.
Well, no, that's actually, I think it's literally in their, isn't it in your national anthem or something?
Yeah, in the English national anthem, there's a line about rebellious Scots to crush.
Wow.
So...
I just like to point out they've never really been successful at that.
No.
They've tried. they've made good effort.
They
I
tried,
guess.
yeah.
Well,
Alright.
I don't know. Scotland is in the UK now for a reason.
It's true.
I guess.
I think you can probably a large part of that has
Well,
to do with
You can
Queen
maybe
Elizabeth
tell why
having kids.
why the Scottish don't particularly like the national anthem.
Yeah,
I wonder
big-
why. I can't tell.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway.
Getting back to the topic, I guess. Aubrey, you mentioned this one YouTuber to me, and she mentioned a piece out of Wired called "The Problem with the Me Too Movement," or "The Me Too and Viral Outrage." I wanted to read a passage here that might be useful here in some ways. This passage is coming at this as that Me Too and this viral outrage that we have online is kind of an issue and not actually all a great thing in itself. But this one paragraph here says, on its surface, #MeToo has the makings of an earnest and effective social movement. It's galvanizing women and trans people everywhere to speak out about harassment and abuse. It's causing everyone to weigh in on systemic sexism in our culture. In truth, however, #MeToo is a too perfect meme. It harnesses social media's mechanisms to drive users, that's you and me, into escalating states of outrage while exhausting us to the point where we cannot meaningfully act. In other words, #MeToo, despite the best intentions of so many participating, is everything that's wrong with social media.
I actually slightly disagree with the targeting of the Me Too movement with this exhaustion, because I think that's just like a product of social or social networking and just the internet in general. So even just thinking about like just whenever you're inundated with a certain particular thing, it'll come to a point where it starts to get exhausting. Reading about it and just even hearing it,
Yeah.
So it's I think it's a slight stretch. Maybe if they broadened, the author broadened her, I guess broaden things up a bit and not target the singular movement for something that is just kind of natural to how the internet operates today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, things go viral. That's what we use as a term. And I think that this did go viral, but it's like a good thing that went viral.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that it's necessarily a bad thing that went viral. I think the point of it is that it went viral. And just like almost every viral thing, it eventually hits that tipping point where people just get tired and they just stop talking about it. And that's generally what happens with a lot of social media campaigns. Is people get like really worked up, really talking about it, they're really energized, but then they don't actually ever do anything, and eventually they just kind of move on to the next topic, which was, I think, what I said initially when I was talking about the Me Too movement.
It's worth remembering as well that I don't know why exactly, but people get excited for one. There's so many issues that people get excited for one issue. There's a big push to do something about it, and then it sort of peters out. So by the time the legislation actually kicks into place, the Conservatives, for whatever reason, are really on the ball fighting against it. I don't know why, but the interest to push it actually sort of dies off, and so it never happens.
That's basically what happened with Occupy Wall Street too.
Yeah, so there's a big push for, hey, we're going to do something about this. This is great. Loads of people involved, and it sort of peters out, and that never translates into the legislative process without any kind of long-term activism, if you will.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the interesting thing about, you brought up Occupy Wall Street, and I was part of that. And I think that the good thing about, even though it did peter off, the good thing about that is I think that was really our generation's first national, protest. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Our generation hasn't protested that much. We're still in our 20s and 30s, and we haven't had a ton to object to from our government. So Occupy Wall Street and Occupy whatever city you're in really was a great push for that. I went to Occupy Philadelphia several times. I was a part of that. I helped out. But I think that it kind of morphed into us being able to protest all of these other causes that are still tied to that, whether it be Black Lives Matter or, you know, women's rights issues, trans rights issues, like LGBT issues. We're being more vocal about all of those things.
I think the thing we always miss, though, is that because social conservative movements tend to get better funding, for some reason, again, there's very, very wealthy people who are very against social progress, and they will pour loads of money into organising grassroots campaigns to fight against these movements, and they'll get organised and they will put candidates into office and stuff. And the social progressive movements never have that level of funding and organisation from the top, which I think we need a lot more of to put these candidates into, especially America, local offices and state offices, and get candidates running for elections, and get people who get like an NRA who they have one thing they care about, and that's it, and they will constantly fight for that one thing. Whereas progressive, so many issues got to fight for that we need groups that will focus on a single issue, and they will constantly call the congressman week after week. Have you done this yet? Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet?
Right.
And put funding into candidates and withdraw that funding into not
I think
come along and run ads against them and fight for single issues, as opposed to progressives who, for obvious reasons, because there's so much wrong, but if we spread out across loads of issues like we have to, it kind of loses focus in any one area.
I think a good example of a progressive organization that funnels a lot of money into fighting for things politically is Planned Parenthood. I believe there are those organizations out there that are progressive or more left leaning. Except you do have a point with what you said. Also, something I do want to bring up, something that kind of, I think as a society we are very, I think we're on the same page when it comes to very reprehensible human beings, like say your Bill Cosby's, and even like your Harvey Weinstein's, like you brought up. But what's going on now is it broadened the conversation to more nuanced and to make it a little bit more nuanced. So now there's some you hear a conversation about more ambiguous actions that, for the most part, men do to women, and that includes sexual harassment. You know, and an example of that is Aziz Ansari, which, of course, if people don't know, essentially he sexually harassed a woman who was out on a date with him. According to him, it was consensual, except, however, reading it, it's clear that he did pressure her, despite her reaction to it all. And it kind of, and I think that's really, really important. That's a gray area for us as a community and as a society, are those moments, because I believe those are more common with your everyday Joe. You know, just that kind of, the pressuring, or like the or making women uncomfortable with saying things, or even gesturing certain things, or doing certain things to them. So I believe that's definitely really, really big and cool.
Yeah. And
I agree with that. I think that tied with that, like, we really need to be raising our sons and our male identifying children to, like, treat everybody with respect, and that they are no better than anybody else. And I think that that's something that we treat our daughters, but we don't necessarily treat our sons. And I mean, we also need to continue to teach our daughters that, you know, consent is very important as well.
yeah, it's very good points.
Yeah, that's actually, because I think the topic of consent isn't really actually explained very well. And I think when I initially heard that 50 Shades of Grey was, you know, becoming popular, you know, a BDSM story, you know, I was like, oh, good. You know, that's going to create a discussion around consent, because, you know, BDSM is all about consent.
Right.
And then then I actually started hearing details of the story, and I was like, no, that's abuse. There's no consent there.
I've been saying that for so long. I'm so glad somebody else is bringing it up.
Sending completely the wrong message. Not just about BDSM, but also about consent and good relationships. I mean, so, and I think a lot of stuff like that, it just muddies the water of consent even further. I mean, you know, I mean, and it's odd because people
are so popular in films. I mean, they've made all of them into movies, and everybody loves them.
They're absolutely horrible.
I don't understand it either. I don't get it. There's some women at work with me in Jordan that, like, actually go see all those movies, and I don't get it. I actually, back when the first book came out, me and my ex, we got the book, and we were laughing at it because of how horribly ridiculous it is, and, like, the poor writing in it and everything is just really bad. And, like, it's just, it's comically horrible in some ways. And we watched the first movie and we laughed about that as well because it was so unbelievably terrible, the movie in itself. It's just a bad movie. I don't get how anyone watches that movie and says, that was such a good movie. I don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't see it at all.
Well, and I mean, it got its start as a Twilight fan fiction. And then basically the Twilight community said, no, that's really bad, that's horrible, and they rejected it. And so she just changed the names and published it. But I mean, like, I read fan fiction all the time. That's one of my favorite things to read. There's a ton of really well-written fan fiction with intricate plots and detailed. I mean, one of my favorite series, I'm on the second book, and it's like 78 chapters long. And the first book was like 75 chapters long. So, I mean, like, they're huge, you know? It's not all sex or whatever, you know, like a lot of people think it is. You know, and they're very well-written, very intricate plot. You know, I mean, it's practically Game of Thrones level plot, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, so my point is, like, there's a lot of really well-written fan fiction out there, and this just happens to be really bad. Like, even by fan fiction standards.
And then on top of it, it's really poor representation of a BDSM relationship.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, it's...
I think what it looks like to me is like BDSM relationships from the perspective of someone who's never been in one, maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
And someone who doesn't know really anything about it other than it involves a lot of risky sexual acts.
Right.
Yeah, and that somebody's in power and somebody's not. There's a dom and a sub. But she places dom and sub relationships as how they are in, like, outside of their sex life. And obviously that's not accurate.
Yeah, that's not at all how it works.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, that's a huge topic in and of itself. Sorry, rabbit trail.
I think 50 Shades is just a reflection on our society. So, like, how we handle the topic of or the action of consent is, like you said, Aubrey, it's something that's so, like, it's not even covered very often. It's finally like something that people talk about. But even when I was in school, in high school, back when when your body starts to change, and you're interested in different things. That's the time where that conversation should start to happen. And sitting in sex ed, they teach you all about the inner workings of sexual organs, but they don't talk about the nuances of actually the actual leading up to that part. And so
I think why they do that is largely a lot of parents don't want their kids being taught by their teachers, that kind of stuff. They don't want them to be taught all the intricacies, because there are a lot of parents that are like terrified of ever thinking that their child might learn something about sex. And it's why we have a very large movement in this country, and especially in some states, to get rid of sex education altogether. And maybe some parents along the way were well-meaning when they were trying to shelter their children from learning about sex education. But
I think they're all well-meaning. Their interpretation of well-meaning doesn't match up with yours.
Yeah. I suppose. But yeah, I think that's why our schools only really ever teach you the nuts and bolts, as it were, of like sex, and like, okay, these are the ovaries, and this is the penis, and this is the balls, and stuff like that. Like they break it down like that because the parents would be outraged if their kids came home and we're like, okay, so we were taught about this something about sex today, and like, I don't know. I think most parents' heads would maybe explode if they were actually taught a little bit more in depth about actual like things about relationships and all of that.
The problem with that is that they then don't turn around and actually talk to their kids about it. I mean,
Right.
My parents exempted me from sex education. I never went through it. I didn't even know the word vagina until I was 16 years old. I had no idea what to call that part of me. It was never mentioned, never brought up, and I heard zero references to it.
Was it called the woo-woo or the ha-ha or the...
No, not even talked about.
Nothing. Wow.
Wow.
Not at all.
That's
Like,
bizarre.
wow. Like, never even like, hey mom, what is this? She never even talked to you about that when like you were really young?
No,
Wow.
not at all. In fact, she didn't even teach me how to clean properly down there.
Oh,
I had to figure that out myself.
Wow.
Because you don't touch down there. Not ever.
Parents are great.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, yeah. So I mean, like she exempted me from sex ed for religious reasons, because my parents were fundamentalist Baptist Christians, and that's just not something that is okay to talk about. And they never ever talked about the birds and bees with me. I barely knew what a period was when I got my first period.
Wow.
I mean, it's so important for our children to know those things about themselves, because it's a scary time for them anyway. I mean,
I can't even imagine.
it's so essential.
I can't even imagine, like, just like starting the period cycle and never even being told what the hell that is. You might think you're dying. Like, that's... Yeah,
Mom mentioned it kind of offhand to me to kind of explain it, because she knew I was 12 years old, so I was probably going to get my period at some point. But, so I knew it involved something like blood kind of coming from that area. And you put a pad down there on your underwear and it catches all the blood and it's fine. And I was like, okay, And then, like, I actually got it while I was at my grandparents' house, staying at my grandparents' house for the week.
Oh, that's
and
fun.
So, yeah, I just happened to look down at the toilet paper after wiping, and I was like, oh, there's blood there. Why is
Am I
it
dying?
Oh, period. Right. I need a pad. Grandma, do you have any pads? And she just kind of looked at me like, what?
Not in 20 years, baby.
35 years.
I didn't know what menopause was either. Like, I honestly, genuinely thought that she would have them.
I mean, you were a kid.
Well, I don't remember them explaining menopause in sex ed, you know?
Yeah, it's... And so, yeah, Grandma had to take me to Walmart to buy my first pads for me.
Wow.
So that was fun.
That is just disturbing that your parents would never tell you a thing about it.
Well, yeah.
That's like neglect in a lot of ways.
Never comes up, right?
I think.
Yeah.
That's easily neglect, if not like worse. I don't know. It's horrible. Yeah. But
I definitely think it's really important for us to teach our children about consent, though.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's probably more important than knowing where the ovaries are. You know, I mean, when am I ever going to deal with my ovaries? Unless I have some sort of medical thing going on with my body, which I hope never happens. You know, I don't need to know that information, but I do need to know about consent, and you know,
right.
They don't need to teach my kids, oh, you only should have sex in a relationship or anything like that. But something more needs to be done in our education system, I think. And I think that parents need to become more comfortable with talking about sex with their children, because it's really not that difficult of a conversation to have.
You know, everyone does it. Your parents do it. You know, obviously, no matter how disgusting, like, we even think of it being for our grandparents and our parents to have ever done it, you know, it happens. They're human beings, and it happens. That's all I can say. So, I mean, it shouldn't be this, like, horrible, icky, we can't ever talk about sex. Ew. Like, it's just like, that's not really helping things. Like, you're sort of trying to ignore the problem away, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading up for the show today, like, I came across, I think it was just like a list of advice to men from a woman, where she was talking about men picking up women's non-vocal cues.
Would you like to read
to
from
determine
that at all?
whether or not I don't have the leak in front of me,
okay.
but it was like this huge list, and a lot of it was BS. But
well, how about this? What are your ideas for that? What would you say to men?
My point, though, initially was because she was talking about men picking up women's non-vocal cues. Women pick up non-vocal cues from each other all the time. It's actually something we're sort of trained to do from a young age. I don't think that's the case with men. I mean, how often does a woman come home from, like, getting a haircut and she expects to have her husband comment on it, and he doesn't even notice? You know what I mean?
I pick things up and put them down.
A lot of things people aren't just going to pick up on, you know? You have to actually, rather than telling men that they need to pick up on non-vocal cues. I mean, yes, that's a very important thing. You know, keep an eye out for, if a woman looks uncomfortable, and then back off if that's the case. But at the same time, you also need to encourage women to actually speak out when they're uncomfortable. Don't just, look uncomfortable and expect him to notice.
Yeah.
Well, and
he's not.
Our like sons and daughters and everybody, all of our children, to become more comfortable with talking about, I'm uncomfortable in this situation, or for him to say, are you comfortable with this situation? I don't think that that's unsexy to be like, to double check with somebody. I think that shows courtesy, and I think that most people would appreciate that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's actually one of the things I really admire about specifically the BDSM community, is that they place such an emphasis on consent at almost every step of the way.
Right.
Yeah, there's safety words and all that to jump
consent
out immediately.
Consent can be withdrawn at any time, and they immediately pull back.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's something that I think we really should learn from the BDSM community.
Yeah.
And Yeah.
That makes sense.
As far as messages for guys, I don't know. A lot of it just boils down to don't be an asshole.
Yeah. And I mean,
learn to
Don't
communicate.
assume-
I don't know.
Yeah.
yeah. With regards to that Aziz Ansari issue, part of the problem there sounded like, from what I remember of it, was he wasn't picking up on her nonverbal cues in a lot of ways. And I mean, some of them were verbal, where she was saying, I don't know, I don't think not right now, or some, I don't remember what it was, but she was sort of like more dismissive of it and really didn't like say, no, I don't want to do this right now. And it was sort of like, I don't know, maybe later, or I don't remember entirely from it because it was a while ago when I read about it. But it didn't seem like he was picking up on her cues and everything like that. And to your point there, Aubrey, that yeah, like men can, I guess, sometimes really be terrible at picking up those cues, even if it's like more even in words form too at times. And yeah, I don't know what that is.
I mean, like,
exactly.
so like I hear, well, not right now, you know, I don't, maybe later or something, you know, I hear that and I'm just like, oh, back off. She just wants her space.
Totally.
And
But some guys
might not hear that.
Yeah, a guy might hear that, oh, she wants to do it. She's saying maybe later. So therefore, if I press hard enough, then maybe we'll actually do it. That might be what's going through some of these guys' heads. What's that?
But it's also hard.
That's part of the needed education, though. You need to understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe later. It might actually mean maybe later, but that means slow down, not now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give her space. Let her make up her mind.
And I think it's hard for women sometimes because we're so used to speaking in this kind of, as you said, nonverbal way. It's hard for us to sometimes really be verbal about things and to actually say, no, I'm not interested. That's really, it's not only is it hard because we're not used to it, but it's also kind of scary in certain situations with men because we don't feel comfortable saying absolutely not, go away in those kinds of situations because for whatever reason, if it's we feel uncomfortable with them, we feel like we don't have as much safety as we would like in that situation.
And also there's the added part of like, if you're on a date with this guy, generally speaking, you're probably interested in him. You might not be interested in having sex with him that day or, you know, at that point in time, but maybe later. You might want to pursue this relationship, so you don't want to give him a hard no and then he just decides not to date you. And that's a lot of the rationale that goes through a lot of these women's minds when they're put in this situation.
Yeah, I think there's that, and also like men being a little bit more physically stronger than women usually. A lot of women might worry that if they say a strong no, that this guy might just attack them or worse.
Yeah, or they're crazy. I mean, some of these men are really crazy. If they say no, and even if they don't attack them right then, they could stalk them. They could, you know, follow them home. If they live in a city, they're walking home. Like, saying no and then having to leave a bar is kind of scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean, women have to think about those factors that I don't think men ever have to think about.
Right. Right. It can even it can even affect like women's opportunity within their industry, within, you know, particular industries, like we see with like men exerting their power in you know, just exploiting you know, women, and because they have, you know, they're in a powerful position. So that's
Yeah, it's also, I mean, well, and part of it is also a bit of this mentality where we teach girls that they're vulnerable, and so therefore they must always be afraid too. I mean, that YouTuber that I recommended to you, Chris,
Leanna K.
She was, Leanna K. She was talking about how she was taught, like, in self-defense classes to, you know, say, make a big scene, you know, be loud, shove them away forcefully, when you're walking, hold your keys so that one of them is like outside, like, pointing out from your hand so that, if you go and you punch a guy, that key is going to hit his face, so you actually are able to hit back. I mean, obviously this isn't perfect. I mean, it's not going to fit all situations, but it actually gave her a sense of control in situations where I think a lot of women who grew up without those sorts of classes don't feel that control. They don't feel that same sort of confidence. They feel more like a victim because, in a way, they've sort of been taught to be one.
I think self-defense classes are amazing, and I haven't been in one, and I would love to. But I also feel like, back to rape culture,
oh yeah, sorry.
How much of a rape culture do we live in that, men don't have to worry about a self-defense class? I mean, they might take karate or jujitsu. I can't speak right now when they're children, but I mean, men don't have to worry about defending themselves against women or other men. I mean, very often, I guess.
Well, in reality, they probably should actually worry about it more, but
yeah,
they've been taught that it's not really a concern.
Yeah.
Although, honestly, a mugging is more likely than a sexual assault if you're a man.
Totally. Most women who do experience sexual assault or rape are the victims of a partner or friend.
Yeah. Or
someone
family
that they know
member
personally. Yeah,
well.
for a family.
You almost always know your attacker.
Yeah.
Even in domestic or even in violent situations.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not usually strangers, guys.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's quite sad, the culture in this country these days, and maybe not just this country either. I don't know if this pervades into the UK and Europe at all. Or even if Michael's still with us, he might have fallen asleep. You never know.
No. I don't want to... Given the topic, I don't want to say too much.
Oh, why is that, Mike? I almost called you Jordan.
Wow.
Jesus.
Throwing everyone under the bus.
Gee, a guy talking about rape culture, there's not actually that much I can add.
Yeah, I get that.
So I'm just listening, really, and,
Yeah.
I definitely can say, being, growing up, I wasn't taught to respect the boundaries of women. And it was just so apparent through the actions of just the boys growing up, in school, which, it was just being very handsy and not giving a care about the responses that these women and girls were giving them. It was almost as if it's definitely a behavior that was encouraged by the dominant, who happens to be men and boys, and within that setting, and even just in society at large. So it's there is a big need for reconditioning from an early stage for boys and for girls as well, because just to, like you guys said, they need to be aware that they do have a choice, and boys have to be aware that you have to respect the responses, and whether or not it's vocal or visual that you're getting in that moment. And so it's something that just that needs to be really emphasized for the kids that are coming up right now.
Yeah. And I wanted to add to that, part of the problem I think also is with the culture, like you were saying, a lot of guys when they're younger, they're like, oh yeah, I totally made out with so-and-so. And what they get from their peers is, oh man, that's awesome. Oh, you're so cool. And that is the reinforcement right there in it. And it's hard to change that because they're kids, and it's hard to stop them from being excited over making out with Susie from biology or something. I don't know.
Well, part of the reason why it's seen as cool and adult is because we do have a sort of Puritan reaction towards sex in our culture. You know, I mean, it's taboo. We don't talk about it. So, of course, if they're talking about it and if they're actually engaging in these acts when they know they're not supposed to be, obviously that makes them cool because that's how teenagers think.
Yeah.
I mean, we were all teenagers once. We're familiar with the mindset.
This is true. But
so having a more open conversation about it and emphasizing that it's not, you know, just something for adults, but it's okay as a teenager to explore your sexuality. You know, just be safe about it. You know, protect yourself. You know, and you know, as well as care about, you know, your sexual partner's desires, and you know whether or not they're okay with things that you're doing. I mean, if you have that active conversation about it, that'll actually reduce a lot of this sort of teenage boy culture. I guess it'll reduce it. I don't think it'll eliminate it, but you know, teenage boys.
Yeah, understandable. But we are, I think, way over time, unfortunately. I think we really need to have a part 2 of this at some point, guys. Because
there's so many things we didn't talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is such a big topic, and I really want to talk more about this. This was a very, very great conversation, and I really want another one at some point soon, maybe. But thank you, Aubrey and Kate, for being here with us today, and we really appreciate you being here. It was a really, like I said already, it was a great conversation, and definitely want to do this again soon. So we can finish this up. Maybe 2 parts isn't even enough for this.
It depends.
I'm
how
open
much time
to
we got.
Yeah.
But none more tonight, unfortunately. Maybe another week in the future we'll go into the next part. But thank you everybody that's listening to the show this week. We really appreciate you guys listening to us week in, week out. We've got like 40 to 50 something people weekly downloading the podcast.
That's awesome.
I don't know who these people are, but I would like to shake their hands. But thank you, everybody. I guess let's go around the room here. Final thoughts, Kate. Final thoughts on the topic at all?
I hope that we can continue to move forward in respecting women, and hopefully we'll eventually get to an equal standing to men. And also thank you so much for having me.
No problem.
I didn't say that earlier.
Maybe next time. Like I said, like we really like to have you back for the part 2 of this. So
I'm totally into
you'll be
it
in the future as well. But Jordan, any last words?
Yeah, I guess even we, as much as we encourage that these conversations actually take place, even if they don't, because I know there are certain pockets where in the world that they aren't happening, they take some cue or some note from these public figures being publicly denounced for their actions. Like, I think seeing such a strong reaction to these beloved public figures, hopefully, if not the conversation, that will be kind of give them an idea about what's right and what's wrong for us as a society. So, yeah.
Good point. Aubrey.
Oh, how to pare this down. Well, I guess thanks for having me on, first of all. Also, I mean, just basically don't be a dick, and if you're not sure, if she's willing to do something, ask, and then respect her response.
Yes.
I would say if you're not sure, back off.
Yes.
Maybe is a better way to be. I don't know.
Yes. Give her space if she wants space.
Yeah. If you can't tell, then maybe you need to reassess the situation and back off a little bit and see at that point. But
Yes.
Michael, last words?
Best of last day, Chris.
What?
Best of last day, Chris.
Yeah, of course.
I
I
usually like to end these things by saying, you should phone your state legislators or congressman or whatever politician it is. But this isn't the same thing. It's more of a social problem. And that means it's an issue where every individual person can actually be a significant change. So with this one, if you want to see changes, you have to be it. Respect women's needs and wants, and talk to people and communicate with women about what they want, not just your partners but friends and women you see. And yeah, as we've discussed tonight, you just be bettering yourself, and that makes a big difference on the whole. If that's phrased right.
I guess that works. I guess my last words are: do not be Donald Trump. Please, for the love of God, don't ever be Donald Trump when it comes
Isn't
to
that
this
just
kind of thing.
generally
Generally
good advice?
in general, I suppose, but in this regard, especially, just don't be that asshole. And
Wow.
lastly, fuck you, Donald Trump, and all the Republicans out there, because fuck you guys. You are pieces of trash. Anyway, I usually ended up.
I
nice and
wonder
strong like
how this podcast, who's this podcast geared towards?
that. I don't know. I have no.
Oh.
We advertise for mainly conservative audience.
I mean,
Right.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not
Although
saying.
I will say, I know plenty of hardcore Republicans that absolutely hate Donald Trump. I'm just saying
Mhm.
that. Yeah. So
And I'm not
Cut 'em out.
saying. I'm not trying to say that as all Republican voters. I'm talking about the Republican lawmakers. When I say
those
that,
guys. Fuck those
I
guys.
didn't mean. I guess I was too generalized with that. I usually say "f you" to Donald Trump, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, all those types, and
also,
that's how I
fuck
usually
you,
do it.
Steve
But
King. I hope you lose re-election.
that too.
Go JD Schultz.
Screw
and
that
that
guy.
kid from Canada, I hope he gets deported.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much. You have a
Thank
great
you.
week. We will see you here next week.
Bye-bye.